Good morning, Superboy Legacy fans. This is your Superboy fact checker, Chris Jacobsen. With me, as always, is my co-host, the ever irrepressible Tom Gallagher. Notice we're both fighting colds, so this shows how irrepressible we are.
Yeah, got bunged up nose. My voice is slightly off, but at the same time, we were looking forward to recording this, the final part of this 4-part mini series that we've been doing, and at the time of recording this, only the first part has actually released, but we did have a nice comment on it this morning, so that was nice. Yeah, I hope people are enjoying it. Otherwise, this has been quite a boring month for you, because this has been the entire month's worth of releases. But anyway, so we started off with Panic in the Sky with George Reeves, followed it up with Superboy Lost, and then finally Lois and Clark's All Shook Up. And so you might be wondering, like, what are we even going to talk about in this? But I suppose maybe you'll get an idea just from the thumbnail image or something. But yeah, there was an adaptation of Panic in the Sky as a comic book, which was released literally the following year. There are also 2 episodes of Superman the Animated Series in the 90s, both from season 2 as well, that have vague similarities, but not quite enough to warrant doing a commentary or anything on them.
Right.
But yeah, we're going to talk about those. And I think what we should do is we should talk about the animated series stuff first and then close it out with the comic book adaptation. Yep. Just so we sort of started and ended sort of in the same era, the series. I mean, you know.
Yep.
Bookend it. So yeah, the first episode we're going to be talking about from Superman the Animated Series is season 2, episode 3, The Promethean. I hadn't seen this episode before, as far as I remember. I've made it no secret that I'm not really an animation guy. And I never really liked the animation style of this series. I don't know. I just think I never liked the giant Bruce Timm shoulders. I don't know why. As a kid, I just didn't like it, so I didn't watch it. Plus, the LOS missing from the cape always pissed me off, because I'm a stickler for that. I just think it's a shame when it's missing. But the Promethean.
If we recall, you know, the Ruby Spears series, which came before the Bruce Timm series, they had the LOS on the cape. So
yeah, which proves it could be done. Yeah, it could be done. And the Ruby Spears show, I mean, I'm just judging it based on what it looks like. I would guess had a lower budget than the Bruce Timm version, because the Bruce Timm version, I think, production value wise, has a lot more going for it.
Yep.
Especially in the way that the animation's directed. There's a great sequence in this episode, The Promethean, when Superman is trying to stop the meteor from crashing to Earth, and it's got this giant creature thing strapped to it. And there's just this whole sequence where he's sort of trying to push against it, and the camera angles are dynamic, and the action is really great. And the Ruby Spears show had a lot of that going for it as well, but I'm just guessing they didn't have quite as larger budget, because you could even tell a difference between the title sequence with the Ruby Spears show and the actual animation in the episodes itself. There was a lot less shading in the actual episodes. But yeah, so, you know, it proves the LOS can be on the cape. I think it's a shame that just because it was left out of that one show, it was then left out of Superman Returns, and then Man of Steel, and Superman and Lois. And it's just like, you know, I kind of wish they'd bring it back. James Gunn, I know you're not watching, but if you are, just because you're like, who are these people trying to rip off our name? We kind of had it first. Bring back the LOS on the cape. I know you did a poll on Twitter last week where you said, like, trunks or no trunks, and Trunks won on the poll. He did say he's not going to let that actually sway his decision. It was just for fun. But I don't care about the trunks so much anymore. Just put the LOS back on the cape.
Well, not to get off topic or anything, Tom, even though we always do.
Yeah. It's a big part of our show.
Having the trunks is kind of necessary to the suit in one aspect. Having the blue bodysuit like Henry Cavill did, and then later, Tyler Hoechlin, it's too garish, that much of one color without something to break it up.
You just need a good belt. It's like Superman and Lois has done it well with a belt. Like I think the Superman Reborn suit in the Rebirth era of the comics, I think was the perfect modernization. The belt is just enough to break up the blue. The problem with Cavill's suit, as you say, it's just blue from top to bottom, basically. And there's like this little oval in the Man of Steel suit and the little square with the BVS and Justice League suit, depending on which version of Justice League you're watching, of course. And it's just, you need something to break it up. Otherwise, it just, the middle of the suit ends up looking a bit boring. And, say what you want about Superman's suit, but it's certainly not boring. It's designed to be eye-catching.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, I'm not too worried about the briefs, but they do need something. And I think a good belt would go a long way. But, yeah, I think that's fair enough. But the Promethean, definitely a familiar opening of the episode. Obviously, it's a meteor heading to Earth. Superman goes to stop it, but I did like that this time he's approaching it in a slightly smarter way. He's landing on the meteor and planting explosives along its surface, so he can try and break it up using a bit of science, I suppose.
Yep.
I think that's interesting, and if the other Supermen had that idea, maybe they wouldn't have lost their memories.
Well, remember, George did have that idea at the end.
Yeah, at the end, after the damage was done.
Yep.
But obviously Superman was working with, was it Hamilton who was on the space station? Yes. Yeah, so it's just purely I'm guessing just from the fact that he's got this close personal relationship with Star Labs, essentially. Like he's got friends there, he's worked with them a bunch of times. I guess that opened up the possibility of different methods for doing this. So yeah, I thought that was really cool. And then I thought, obviously, as then the ship goes round, somehow they didn't notice until this point, and even Superman didn't notice, but when you see the backside of the meteor and there's this giant creature shackled to it in chains, and it adds for a second, it adds this sort of interesting moral quandary to it. It's like, is this a living creature? Can we kill it? Just, I guess it comes down to the needs of the many over the needs of the few or the one. But at the end of the day, it's like, can you just kill something? Like, it's presumably at this point, at least, it's presumably innocent in this whole thing. It's chained to this meteor. It's not like it's controlling it. It's like, it's not its fault. It's about to crash into Earth.
Right.
I just thought that was interesting, and I'm actually glad that this story didn't have the amnesia angle this time. I do think we can probably, assume that it was at least somewhat inspired by Panic in the Sky and Superboy Lost and All Shook Up, because I don't know. I just think, I think it was Stan Berkowitz wrote this episode. Am I right?
I believe so. Yeah.
Yeah, and the guy knows his stuff. He knows Superman as a character really well. He's written enough of him.
Absolutely.
So that he must have had that in his mind. A meteor heading to Earth. He must have been like, "Wait, we've done this before."
Yeah, and if you recall, he was the one who was the brainchild behind the Rhodes episodes on Superboy. And then, of course, one of the greatest episodes of Superman the Animated Series was Brave New Metropolis, which is an alternate universe episode.
There we go. He's obviously, got one of his favorite subject matters.
Yep.
But then who doesn't love the multiverse? the world's just coming around to the idea now of multiverse stories. Like they seem to be the big thing at the moment. There's that movie that I think it's got a bunch of like Oscar nominations for. Is it Everything Everywhere All at Once? The
Yeah,
big
is that the one
multiverse
with
movie.
Michelle Yeoh?
Yeah, and it's got the guy that was short round in Indiana Jones and Temple of Doom,
Okay.
and he was in Goonies as well, obviously.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was his big comeback, and people are really happy for him. And I've got to admit, I am too. It's nice to see him again because I enjoyed him in both those films. He's not my favorite part of Temple of Doom, but he's also not my least favorite part. I mean, I think we can all guess who my least favorite character in Temple of Doom would be.
Willie.
Yeah, she's just such a downgrade from Marion.
Yeah, but you remember they couldn't use Marion because this movie was supposedly set as a prequel to the Raiders.
But that's a decision made in the script.
Yeah,
you could easily just say, okay, it's not set before Raiders.
Yeah,
because there's no real thing in that story that tells you it has to be before necessarily. The only reason it has to be is because presumably Indy would still be with her by that movie. It's only really there to explain why she's not.
Yeah, and normally I like Kate Capshaw as an actress. It's just
I mean, I don't dislike her as an actress. I just think the character was a waste of time. There was very little redeemable about that character. She just whining and screaming and
lost his gun.
Yeah, just so gotten off topic a little bit there.
Yep.
But back to the episode itself, though, of the Promethean. We were just talking about how the multiverse is quite a popular thing at the moment, but I think comic book writers and TV writers have always known this. Like Lois and Clark had a few multiversal episodes regarding Tempest. Granted, they were more about history being altered storylines rather than. But we did have one multiverse one.
Yeah, slightly altered.
It would be they have to go back in time and prevent the timeline from being changed. But there was still the one where they went to the other universe, and I think that's the only episode we met Lana Lang as well, was in the alternate dimension episode.
It was a season 3. It was either season 2 or season 3 episode. And we meet, and Clark comes up to Lois and says, I just ran into my old girlfriend from high school, Lana Lang, and she wants to come to the wedding. And I didn't know what to say, so I figured I'd come talk to you. And that's when Lois gets abducted by Tempest to the alternate Earth. And then we meet the alternate version of Lana.
And she's evil.
Well, she's not evil. She's just...
Well, she betrays them. She's not a good person in the story necessarily.
She's kind of holding Clark back with, hide your powers, hide your powers, hide your powers.
I guess she's the Kevin Costner, Jonathan Kent.
Yeah.
What am I supposed to do, Lana? Just let them die? Anyway. But anyway. Yeah, I just think it's fun that Stan Berkowitz had a hand in Roads Not Taken, as you say, and then also the big multiversal episode of the animated series too. I think that's cool. But back to the episode itself, I'm glad that they didn't stick with the Amnesia storyline, even though it must have been in his head. It leads into kind of an original story. I mean, it's nothing groundbreaking necessarily, but it's still a very fun story where it almost reminds me a little bit of the death of Superman in a way, where it's just like you have this creature that's just walking and it's like nobody can stop it. It was just this very tiny little reminder of the death of Superman, but it was definitely in my head for a little bit while watching that. But there's a bunch of little tropey things in this episode. Like there's the familiar trope of the military general whose name I am forgetting.
General Hardcastle.
General Hardcastle. Perfect name for that character, actually, because he is a familiar. He's like the typical trope of like the trigger happy moronic army general who somehow has a position of power despite not listening to anyone else's advice.
Yep.
Like he screws
And
things up for everybody
played
at
expertly
multiple times.
by Charles Napier, who
Yeah, he
we've
did a
known
great
from
job.
genre programs. You know, I mean,
Yep.
he was always so great as the hard ass, as it were. You know,
And he did play it to perfection. And it's just like it's this character. He even has the that trope of I don't trust aliens. Like it's a trope that's seen in Superman media so many times. It's basically one of Lex Luthor's primary reasons for hating Superman in the modern age is just the fact that he detests the fact that this alien is coming in and stealing all his thunder. But yeah, I think maybe this military general has a similar sort of thing. He doesn't like that. He thinks that his brigade, or I don't know what you even call them, like his team, he's pretty sure could handle the situation, even though we're very quickly proven that no, they definitely could not.
Plus the fact that Superman comes to him in the when they're firing on this gigantic creature, and he says to him, "You got to stop. This is information from Hamilton. The fire is feeding it power."
Yeah, it's like it's literally heat powered. Like the reason, like you see it, it's basically not even necessarily. I wouldn't even say the creature is evil. It's just got very low intelligence, and it's programmed to seek out more heat to power itself.
Yep.
So, like at one point, it goes and it's like I think it's like a steelworks or something, and it just puts its hand into the molten steel or whatever it is, and just soaks up all the heat. And it's just the only reason it's really attacking people is because they're attacking it. And granted, they're not hurting it, but it's probably just like these annoying little things. It's just like swatting helicopters and.
Yep. And one
Yeah.
thing I did notice about the Promethean is that the character itself, the monster, we'll call him, he has a very Jack Kirby design to him.
Yes, I noticed that. I wondered for a minute if it was going to turn out that it was some sort of advanced scout for Darkseid. Maybe Darkseid had like thrown it at the Earth just to see what would happen or something. Obviously, it didn't turn out to be that, but it had the very Jack Kirby brow.
Yeah,
let's call it. Even the shape of its head was very Darkseid or Mongol. I thought that was interesting from a design perspective. But yeah, it was interesting that it's this, and I will say this as well. It's an interesting mystery for the first half of the episode. I like that they didn't just like as soon as the creature's there. I'm glad that there wasn't just a plaque conveniently written in English next to it saying, "This is our robot. Don't feed it any heat," and all of this stuff.
Yeah.
The first half of the episode was very much a mystery. You didn't know what this creature was, why it was doing what it was doing, why it was strapped to this meteor in the first place. So when that reveal came halfway through the episode, I just thought it was a much more interesting thing because, at learning that it's a giant robot at that point actually enhances the story because we've seen Superman go up against it a couple of times already. We've seen that he's kind of outmatched, and we see basically its MO. Like we know how it operates and why we know how it operates, but we don't know why. And then when we find out this information, I just think it's a lot more interesting to have found it out at that point in the story than if we were just told from the get-go.
Yep.
It could have been a pretty boring story if that's how they did it. But, it's Stan Berkowitz. The guy knows what he's doing.
Absolutely. Yep.
But, and yeah, like you said, the military guy, he makes things... After we know about the robot, we know that it's seeking out heat because that's how it's powering itself. And, yeah, Superman goes and tries to warn the general. He's just like, don't fire those missiles at it because you're feeding the thing. He just ignores him.
Yeah, he just says, I already listened to you in Hamilton, and look where we got.
And that annoyed me because he didn't listen to Superman and Hamilton, because the only reason the guy is basically one of the reasons the guy escaped the meteor in the first place is because the guy very much didn't listen and exploded blow up all the explosives that were on the surface of the meteor. He wasn't listening to Superman and Hamilton. They're in the situation because he didn't listen. So the guy's just a fucking idiot. Like, you know, even just what he's saying, like even his motivation in that scene just doesn't make any sense because we know for a fact that he didn't listen at all. You know, so that made me laugh. I already said about how I like the fact that the robot isn't inherently evil. It's just low intelligence.
It's you know, the easiest thing you could say is it's like a force of nature. A force of
or a
nature.
little bit like Frankenstein's monster, you know, it's very low intelligence. He's not really out to hurt anyone, but he kind of can't help it because everywhere he goes, people are attacking.
Yeah,
you know, and he doesn't understand that he's not approaching things in the right way. You know, it's
very childlike in that.
Very childlike, almost. You know, it's one of the reasons we love Bizarro so much in Superboy is because, you know, I remember I said to you, I don't remember if it was on the podcast once, but I was watching it and my niece was round.
Yes.
And she
said
like,
is evil.
Yeah, she was like, is Bizarro evil? And I said, no, he's just very stupid. And, you know, I should clarify that really what I mean is he's very naive. He's not necessarily stupid. It's just one of those things. He's not a bad guy. He just doesn't understand. And that's very endearing. And I like that was an element of this episode. But yeah, fun episode. Some very familiar tropes throughout it, but I thought those tropes were executed extremely well. I do have a question for you though, because obviously, as I've admitted, I'm not a big fan of the animated series, so I've not seen the majority of it. At some point, I will have to. I realise that. It's just, does the robot ever return? Because the end of this episode indicates that it will.
It does not. It does not ever make another appearance.
Oh, that's annoying. Yeah.
Because
it ends with the hand sticking out of the ice, and you see I think it's the moon that you see up in the sky, but
it sort of glows a little bit, but not much.
Yeah. Oh well, I was hoping there was a sequel episode that we could, you know, watch at some point, but well,
I mean,
never mind.
It would have been so great, but like a lot of things with the animated series, you know, and Mixes Pitlick is a prime example of it. You know, they had two really great Mixes Pitlick episodes, and then they couldn't figure out how to bring him back. You know,
he is a very tough character to write. You know,
I
know just from our season 5 episode, that episode was fucking difficult to write.
Yeah,
Mixie is tough. You know.
Yeah, and their Mixes Pitlick was great because he was voiced by Gilbert.
He did such a good job. You know, as I say, I'm not a big fan of this show necessarily. I think the writing is always great. It's just, I just have a weird thing about animation. I don't know what it is, but I've seen that episode, or at least the first Mixie episode, a whole bunch of times. That's one that I'll happily stick on and watch.
I mean, just that scene, you know, when
the montage sequence where he's just tricking him over and over again. It's just like
and then Pitless sitting on the couch, you know, filing her nails, saying 5, 4, 3, 2, and he pops back in and says, "Nuts! How does he keep doing it?"
Yeah, and I guess that's part of the thing. It's, you know, they thought up a whole bunch of ways that Superman can trick him into going home. And they kind of must have shot themselves in the foot to a certain extent, because at that point, it's like, well, now we really need to come up with some more ideas because we kind of used them all in the first episode.
You have to watch the episode Little Big Head Man.
Right. I don't think I've seen that one.
That's the sequel with Mixie. And it features Bizarro.
Cool. Yeah, I will have to check that out at some point. Definitely.
And he tricks Bizarro. Not that that's that hard, mind you. No. But what happens at the end of the episode is just absolutely hilarious. I'm not going to
Okay.
spoil it for you. I just want to let you watch it on your own.
Okay, I appreciate that. Yeah, thank you for not spoiling. So should we move on to the next animated series episode that we were going to talk about?
Yes.
This one I think has less of a connection to what we're talking about, but there is a connection there, even if it does come right at the end.
Yep.
Season 2, episode 22, The Late Mr. Kent.
Yes.
Yeah, less of a connection than the Promethean had, but still a fantastic episode. And it's always fun to watch Clark investigating, like especially when it's like, to clear the name of someone who's going to be executed for murder, and Clark knows he's innocent. And it's a great use of his power as well, like when the guy is like saying that he's innocent and stuff, like Clark's listening to his heartbeat and stuff, like he's using his super hearing as basically a lie detector.
Yes.
So he knows that the guy is innocent, and yet nobody else, everyone is telling him to let it go. The guy's guilty. Like, I don't know why you're fighting this, Clark, they're all saying. And it's just, he knows that he's innocent, but he also can't tell them why he knows this. Obviously, because he can't have them know that he's Superman. Although later on, he does seriously consider that when Clark Kent is thought to have been killed.
Yes.
But yeah, really, really fun episode. I think it actually has more in common with the Al Capone, like Bonnie and Clyde, like episode of Lois and Clark. Just in the whole thing of like they think Clark Kent has been murdered, and so Superman is sort of. I think they even have a similar scene with like Martha Kent and stuff. It's like, I can't just be Superman all the time. It will drive me crazy. And it's always a fun thing when shows or whatever understand just how important Clark Kent is. There's a lot of different interpretations of Clark Kent. Sometimes Clark is the real person. Sometimes Superman is the real person.
Yep.
Sometimes there's three people, essentially. There's the Clark on Smallville. There's the Clark Kent persona at the Daily Planet, who's the bumbling nerd. And then there's Superman.
Yep.
But I'm of the camp where I'm like, I think Clark is more or less who he actually is, and Superman is the mask. It's that line from Lois and Clark, isn't it? It's like Superman is what I can do, Clark Kent is who I am.
Yep.
And I think this episode really, demonstrated that quite well. He when he thinks that his Clark Kent persona is gone forever, he's devastated. And yet at the same time, he's like, well, this guy's still going to be executed, so I don't have time to feel sorry for myself. I've just got to go and continue this investigation as Superman now.
Yep.
And I thought that was really well done. But
Dana
yeah,
Delaney, she has one of her best moments in the entire series in this episode.
She was fantastic in this, in the apartment scene, I'm guessing.
Yes. When she's sitting there looking at that picture of the two of them together, and she's having pretty much a breakdown, realizing that he's gone.
Yeah. How often do you see Lois Lane cry? I mean, I guess Terry Hatcher's Lois cried a fair bit, but that was more for that version of the character.
Yeah.
Lois Lane. I really like Terry Hatcher's Lois Lane, but she was a little bit more emotional than some of the others. I can't imagine, I think my favorite Lois Lane in live action is probably Erica Durance in Smallville. I think she is just the perfect modern Lois Lane. I think she just did a phenomenal job in general with that show. I thought she was just fantastic. Especially since by that point I was kind of sick of Lana.
Right.
So bringing in Lois was the best thing they could have possibly done. It was no more teen angst drama, love stories and stuff. It was Clark moving into a more adult relationship, and I appreciated that they were trying to progress things. I know I'm getting off topic again, but yeah, I couldn't see her character breaking down very often, and I think the animated series is a very similar thing. The fact that she is breaking down in this episode probably says a hell of a lot, and it just makes that that moment so much more powerful, you know?
And just him standing there with her, and you can see it in his face that he so wants to tell her. But again, what you just said about him realizing there's a guy who's about to get executed. I can't worry about this right now. And as much as he wants to tell Lois, I'm right here, I've been right here the whole time, I'm not dead. He's of the opinion we've got to get. I think the inmate's name was Ernest. We've got to,
like that.
Yeah, we've got to get him freed. We've got to figure out who killed me, so that we can save this guy.
Yeah, and can I just ask, because Britain hasn't had the death penalty for a very long time, like a very long time at this point. I think they got rid of it in the 60s or something.
Right.
Do they actually execute people in the gas chamber?
Every state in the United States is a little different. Every state, some states will have the death penalty, some states will not.
But will it be the gas chamber specifically? Because that's something that I'm amazed happens, because I associate gas chamber executions with the Nazis.
Well, some states have
lethal injection. I thought it was lethal injection and occasionally the electric chair.
Yeah, some states do have the gas chamber. Some states do have lethal injection. Some states have, the electric chair. Every state is a little different. And then of course there are some states that, have the death penalty, but it's on a moratorium right now as they're trying to figure out whether we should have it or not have it.
Yeah, I mean, we probably discussed it in the past. I'm of the opinion that, and it's something that this episode really brings home for me. It's like, if even one innocent person is executed, the whole thing's not worth it.
Yeah.
I would rather pay more in taxes to keep people locked away for the rest of their lives than risk putting, executing even one innocent person.
Well, at the end, we do know that Bowman is guilty, so there's no qualms about that one.
Yeah, not with that one, but obviously the whole episode is about clearing an innocent man's name.
Yeah.
So it's like, yeah, I would have been fine with, the cop just, staying in prison for the rest of his life. But I suppose,
given what happens when he's being executed, I think we need him to be executed.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And I've got to say as well, I did love that he realized, like, he's in the chair, the gas is about to be pumped into the chamber, and he's like, how could he survive that? He's Superman. And then that's when the episode ends. It's like he works it out just too late to do anything about it. Yeah, I thought that was really funny. But I didn't want to get political talking about the death penalty. I'm just,
it's okay, Tom. It's okay.
I believe what I believe.
With this episode, there's the only real tie into the whole, Meteor Amnesia storyline is what happened at the end. Yeah.
He needs to find a way for Clark to somehow return, and he needs to also make sure that way also explains why he didn't call Lois immediately.
Yes. And so he goes to Lana, and Lana then calls Lois, and he's been laid up in her apartment in Metropolis for a week, 2 weeks.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah. And he says, I just lost my memory. And she looks at him and she says, yeah, lost your memory, but you still remembered Lana's phone number.
He's known her a lot longer. The phone number, not so much. So she does have a point. But you can make the argument for why he would think of Lana over Lois. But yeah, the phone number is kind of a funny thing. But then again, you could easily explain that away by just doing what they did with Panic in the Sky with George Reeves. Have him remember little details, but not remember why or what they mean. And like you could have just said, he just showed up on my doorstep dripping wet. It's just, that would have been fine.
Yeah.
Yeah. I thought, that's basically the only reason we're discussing this episode is because of Amnesia as a plot point.
Yep.
But it's more the resolution of a storyline than the storyline itself. So we are aware that this episode is even less connected to what we're talking about than the Promethean was. But I still think it was a really enjoyable episode. And if we ever want to do a follow-up to this series, maybe we'll just make it a two-parter and we'll discuss this episode again alongside the Lois and Clark episode with Al Capone, which is incidentally one of my favorite episodes of that show. I know I talk about it a lot. It's one of those ones that I refer to quite a bit because it is just one of my favorites. But yeah, finally, shall we move on to the last real adaptation of Panic in the Sky?
Yes. So I'm going to just bring up my tablet here.
Oh, it's on the screen anyway.
Yeah, this comes from World's Finest Comics number 68.
68, yeah.
Yep.
And I did try to buy a physical copy of it because, I always like to, hold up the comic. Considering this was published in, what year was this? 1953, 1954. It's, one, it would have been expensive. And two, I couldn't find it simply because it's issue 68. And at the top of all the World's Finest comics from this era, they all have advertising as 68 big pages. So if you search World's Finest Comics 68, you find just every World's Finest comic that had 68 big pages written across the top of it. I couldn't find it on eBay. Yeah. Full stop.
I'm sure that DC has probably reprinted it in either one of the archive editions.
Oh, they must have done.
Or one of the like they did those showcase black and white reprints. I'm sure they put it in one of them.
Right. I don't think it's in my greatest Superman stories ever told volumes. I don't think it's in there. But they must have printed, like you say, they must have printed it at least once at some point. But yeah, talking about this comic, I mean, we've got it's called Menace from the Stars this time instead of Panic in the Sky. I would have been fine with them just keeping the title from the George Reeves episode. That would have been fine with me. But it's an interesting take on this story. It opens very similarly, very, very similarly to Panic in the Sky. Even right down to like going to the observatory where there's the professor and he's looking in the telescope and, it's like, it shows strange elements. Like it's possibly got a variety of kryptonite in it, all of that stuff. Like, very, very similar. And he stops it, he loses his memory, and because he lands outside of essentially like a artist's like costume ball type thing, he just assumes that he's in costume too. And Superman thinks, I mean, he at a certain point in this story, he works out that he's Clark Kent. He finds the pouch in his cape on this page, and he finds his way to the Daily Planet. And like very much like in the George Reeves episode, he seems to be finding his way almost by luck and to a certain extent muscle memory. Like he knows where he's going. He recognizes things, but he doesn't know why. But he finds out he's Clark Kent and he just assumes that he's, he was in costume as Superman. And that's really interesting. And like he sees that there's a hold up from the bank, and after as it says here, after a swift change of garb, he comes out and they shoot at him and the bullets bounce off, and he just assumes that it's the power of the costume, that the costume is what's making him invulnerable. And even
and that was something that we didn't touch upon when we watched Panic in the Sky, because there was that
completely missed that.
Yeah, there was that scene between Clark and Jimmy when Clark says to Jimmy, is it possible that Superman gets his powers from his costume?
Yeah, and Jimmy's just like, no, he explained it to me once. Like the costume holds no power whatsoever. It's only Superman is super. You
Yeah.
know. Yeah, it's funny that we didn't mention that. We must have been talking about something else when that moment happened during the commentary section. But that was, thank you for reminding me of that, because that is a good moment in the episode. But yeah, so we have this whole sequence where Superman's going around and he's stopping crooks and he's saving lives, and he's doing all this stuff, and he keeps saying things like, even the real Superman couldn't, I can't keep up with this, like not even the real Superman could. And he's just like, and he's like, but I've got to, because as long as that asteroid's around, and like he knows the Earth is still in danger, and he's just like hoping that the costume is giving him enough power that even him thinking that he's Clark Kent imbued with power by a costume, he knows that he's still got to try at least.
Yep.
And it's really interesting as well, because like eventually he does obviously destroy it, but even after that, he's still assuming that he's just Clark Kent and that he's somehow gotten lucky, or that the costume is somehow somehow responsible. And yeah, so he makes a call to Perry White, and he's just like, I can't tell you over the phone. I'm going to have to come and explain in person. And yeah, on the way, he's not wearing the costume. He's got it bundled up. He's walking back to the Daily Planet, and he gets hit by a truck. And he realizes that not only does he get hit by a truck, but then he lands on some power lines and gets electrocuted. And he's like, my clothes are smoking and like getting burnt. And yet he's not. And that's when he realizes he's invulnerable. And I guess that's when he gets his memory back. He's just like, he knows he must be Superman. And yep. I think, obviously, this issue of the comic, or this story in the comic, it's only the first 15 out of 68 pages. Yeah, it's a nice adaptation of it. They start it off in almost the exact same way, but then they go off in their own direction. Yep. And that is kind of perfect for what we've been talking about, because at the end of all of this, that's what every one of these episodes has been, including the Promethean. They all basically start the exact same way. Sometimes there's an extra scene here and there. Sometimes it takes them a little bit longer, but the setup is always the same. And from the moment he hits that meteor, they go off in a different direction. And obviously, George Reeves did it. Gerard Christopher's show did it. Dean Cain's show did it. The animated series did it with the Promethean, and this comic has done it as well. And it's just interesting that the Meteor and all of that's just the beginning point for the story. And yep. It's where they take it after that makes it interesting and makes it worth adapting again. So yeah, I thought this was a really interesting issue, and it was really interesting just reading this now after we've watched all 3 of those episodes so recently, because you start to see little similarities here and there. And obviously the biggest similarity is always going to be to the George Reeves show, because it's the only other version that existed at that time.
Yep.
But I just thought it really worked very well.
Yeah, I mean George did it first. Everybody else who's come after it, yeah, they've done their own take on it, but they've been the imitators. George was the originator.
Absolutely.
And I said it, in our first episode, just that scene of George just standing outside the lighthouse, looking up with his telescopic vision, and that serious look on his face, that's what you want to see in Superman. Yeah, he has his moments where he can be a little bit humorous.
Usually at the end of the episode, as we talked about.
But generally speaking, when it comes down to it, he's going to be no nonsense when it comes to doing the job. And the little take that the little takeaway that I had from All Shook Up, was, when he comes into the observatory, and he says this to the scientists there. Do you mind if I take a look through the telescope? And the scientist looks up and says, don't you have enhanced vision abilities? He says, yes, but there's limits to even my abilities.
Mm.
That's not something that you would have seen with George or, anything in the comics. That was more John Byrne era Superman.
Yeah. That they purposely reduced his power level in that era. And Lois and Clark especially was very much based on the John Byrne era of stories. I mean, you just have to look at Lex Luthor to see that.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was an interesting moment. And yeah, it's funny because George Reeves, you could make the argument, was less powerful than the comics. Purely because he only ever got to fight gangsters and stuff. So he never really had much of an opportunity to show that level of power. But at the same time, certain abilities, there was no need to reduce the power level of.
Yeah, we never got the mad scientist trope like Lex Luthor in the
which is such a shame. Like, you'd think Lex Luthor would have been one of the villains they could have done in that show.
They could have, but I think that, I think a lot of it had to do with, there was still a bad taste in a lot of people's mouth from Lyle Talbot as Lex Luthor in the serial.
Do they not like him then?
I think they were trying to get as much away from the serials as possible.
Yet they rehired Noel Neal.
Yeah, which is very weird.
Yeah. Just hire somebody else as Luthor, It's like it's his main villain,
Yeah.
And at the same time, they could have brought in, I don't even know if the character was invented at this point. I assume he was, but like characters like the Toyman.
Toyman was in the 40s, yeah.
Yeah, so they could have had Toyman in there. I mean, it would have been difficult, possibly, but I mean, again, they could have had him make like robot teddy bears or something, like giant robot teddy bears, and you could just hire like kids to dress up in like a costume as a teddy bear.
Yeah.
And just have them walking around. There are simple ways that you can do it on a budget, even back then, I'm sure. But yeah, it's just interesting. But then it's the same thing with Superboy's first season, It's like we had Luthor. That was about it from the comics, apart from Mixie.
Yeah.
I can't think of any other Superboy villains in that first season.
Yeah, there weren't any really. It
was mostly the gangsters again, which is very reminiscent of the George Reeves show.
Yeah, we didn't get any more comic related characters until season 2, and that was Bizarro,
Metallo, and
Yellow Perry.
Absolutely.
Knick-Knack technically is the Toyman.
Yeah. I count him as Toyman, certainly.
Yes, especially after our Christmas episode.
Yeah. I'm glad people enjoyed that, by the way. Thank you to the people that sent us messages and left us comments on that.
I think, that was really nice. I think what really made that episode is, one, your overall story. 2, my little tweaks to it, just to punch it up and make it better. And then, of course, basically we were doing, the traditional Christmas story reading of it. And I mean,
the music helped as well.
That too. That definitely.
It was mostly music taken from Santa Claus the movie, and it's people don't want to hear about this in this episode. If you want to go and watch the Christmas special, you can just go and watch the Christmas special. But I think it is time to wrap this up. Thank you all so much for watching all 4 episodes of this, one story 3 times mini-series that we've been doing. Originally, when we conceived of like talking about this for a podcast episode, I think it was only going to be like the 1 episode.
Yeah. Where we would just talk about the 3 episodes put together, and that would have been it. And then over time, it became a situation where we realized, what, we should do a commentary with it as well as talk, do it as one separate episode for each different episode. and then we needed to do a follow-up because you found the comic.
Yeah. Well, I only found out about that because I figured, I went on IMDb just to look at the trivia for the original Panic in the Sky, because often they'll put like referenced in this or remade in this. And when it said that, obviously it mentioned Superboy and Lois and Clark, which we already knew about, obviously. We'd already seen them enough times. But then it also said that there was the comic book adaptation as well. And I don't even think it was IMDb that told me that in the end. I think it was like the DC wiki thing, Wikia, and like, thank you to whoever it was that actually like wrote all that stuff in and put all the details and that on the wiki, because it was valuable just finding out that this existed. And obviously thank you to you, Chris, for pointing out the 2 animated series episodes that are vaguely similar as well. One of them I think was a lot closer than the other, but it was worth talking about both because they were both really solid episodes as well. So they were just fun to talk about anyway. But yeah, thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed this mini series, be sure to leave us a like and please share the video. If if there's friends of yours that you think will enjoy it, share it with them. We always welcome shares.
Don't forget to
wherever.
Subscribe.
Be sure to subscribe and please leave us some comments, because we don't like asking for likes and shares and subscribes and all that stuff, because it does make us feel kind of strange. Like, those YouTubers that are always just like, smash that like button, guys. Let's get up to 100,000 likes for this video. If you do, I'll shave my balls. And it's like,
okay, we're not going to do that, guys.
We're not going to do that. It's like, it's always like stupid things like that. It's like, oh, if if we get 100,000 likes, I'll shave my dog live on air. And it's like, stupid shit. I don't know why I'm thinking about shaving now. I think I just need to trim my beard, and it's annoying me. But there's something tacky about it. But we are also aware that the fact is, one of the main ways that YouTube's algorithm like recommends channels and videos to people that aren't subscribed is based on viewer engagement. If we get comments and stuff, apparently that helps the YouTube algorithm decide to share our stuff. And at the end of the day, we love doing this and we want to keep doing it, and it kind of relies on the viewers keeping watching. I think the day that we upload an episode and it gets less than 100 views, at least in the first month, we get hardly any views, but we get enough. But we'd always like more.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because we appreciate all of you watching, and we just want to keep making stuff for you because we're having too much fun to stop, as we've said 1,000 times. So yeah, be sure to tune in again next week.
Yep, we love geeking out with you guys.
Absolutely. I don't know what we're going to do next week. I think we'll probably be doing the commentary on, I think it's Troubled Waters is the episode that was requested.
Yes.
Not Black Flamingo. I made that mistake. I just knew that it was one of the bad ones.
Yeah, thank God.
Yeah. So yeah, that Troubled Waters was requested, so we'll probably do that as commentary next week. But yeah, at the time of recording this, that's like a month away, because we're a little bit ahead of the upload schedule at the moment. We tried to get ahead of it so we could keep our upload schedule consistent.
In the next few weeks, though, we will have a special guest on. We will have Lou Koza from the Adventures of Superman group. He's a longtime friend. I mentioned him in our commentary on Panic in the Sky. Yeah. He's going to come on. He's going to talk about just in general, anything related to the Adventures of Superman, as well as he'll touch upon some other things, especially Noel and Jack's appearance in Superboy season 4 in Paranoia.
Is he the guy, by the way, that thought it was a missed opportunity and they should have been Lois and Jimmy from the future?
Yes, and when I was talking to him about it yesterday, he's like, I completely forgot I said that.
Yeah, we'll just say to him the same thing we said when you brought that up on the podcast. It's we completely understand why they couldn't do that. They didn't have the rights to Jimmy Olsen or Lois Lane. It's the only reason probably that they couldn't do something like that if they wanted to.
Yeah.
But yeah, that'll be a lot of fun to talk about. I'll look forward to discussing George Reeves'
Yeah,
show with
and
him.
Lou is he's a really fun guy. He's really knowledgeable. Any question that you might have about the Adventures of Superman, Lou is
He
the man
knows.
to go to.
Yeah. So my first question is going to be like, why was Phyllis Coates let go and Noel Neal brought back? So yeah, that'll be fun. I could just Google it in the weeks between then and now, like now and then rather. But I think I'd rather just have it in it, like learn about it in the discussion, But yeah. And I know this is Superboy Legacy, not Superman. It's not the George Reeves show. But we love this character in all its iterations. So every now and then we will be touching on the other versions. Like at some point we're probably going to do a commentary on, the 1984 Supergirl movie. Probably the international cut because I've now got that on Blu-ray.
It finally arrived?
Finally arrived. Yep, there it is.
Oh, cool.
So yeah, at some point we'll be doing a commentary on that. Yeah, and we'll probably end up doing commentaries on the Christopher Reeve movies as well. It might even be fun to do commentaries on both versions of Superman 2. That could be fun.
Yeah, we should start with the Lester version and then move into the Donner version.
Oh yeah, you got to go in release order. Absolutely. Yeah. But yeah, Superman 2, I've said it before, it's the same way I feel about the Justice League movie. I think the best possible version of that movie and Justice League is somewhere in the middle of both versions. Yeah. And that's not to say that, I don't like Richard Lester's vision for Superman 2 or 3. I think he's by far the inferior director. Just as I think Joss Whedon, I'm not gonna defend that guy and his behavior at all, but I do think he did a few things very well in that.
I've pointed it out before. What I believe he did right was the portrayal of Superman. We finally got Henry Cavill as Superman.
Yeah.
He wasn't Superman.
I could have done with a few less jokes. I don't think I think he may have gone a little bit too far in the other direction.
In some cases, yeah, he might have gone a little bit too far, but
But by and large, he got it right.
Yeah, that sequence when he's flying down, into the smokestack of the former nuclear power plant, and he just says, "Is this guy bothering you?" I could see Christopher Reeves Superman doing that.
Yeah, it's like, what was that line? It was, yeah, I'm a fan of truth. I like truth, but I'm also a big fan of justice. And it's like it's a decent enough line, but I just didn't think it was necessary, But yeah, we're not gonna.
It was a great way to announce that Superman had returned.
Yeah, but then they also played just at that moment, and I think that works just as well. That's all you really needed. But at the same time as well, they could have just played a little bit from Hans Zimmer's Superman theme at that moment. I think it would have been just as good as well. I like Hans Zimmer's music for Man of Steel. I think it's one of the best parts of that movie is his music. And you can say the same about Batman vs Superman and Justice League. I think they've got really good scores. But yeah, thank you all so much for watching. Gonna have to wrap it up now, or I'll just keep going for another hour. Goodbye.